What if everything you believed about one of the kindest men in television was only part of the story? For decades, he was the face of comfort, a soft voice in a noisy world, a man who made millions of children feel safe just by looking into the camera and saying a few simple words. He didn't shout. He didn't entertain with chaos. He didn't chase attention. And yet, he became unforgettable. But here's the question no one really asked back then. Was he always that gentle? Or was there something deeper, something hidden beneath that calm smile that the cameras never showed? Because before his passing, the person who knew him better than anyone else, his wife, revealed a truth. Not a scandal, not a betrayal, something far more human. And once you hear it, you may never see him the same way again. Let's step into that quiet neighborhood, the one with the familiar door, the soft music, and the man who changed childhood forever. When Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood first appeared on television in 1968, it didn't look like anything else on TV. There were no bright explosions of color, no loud jokes, no fast-paced distractions fighting for attention. Instead, there was stillness. A man would walk through the door, hang up his coat, change into a cardigan, slip on a pair of sneakers, and speak directly to you. Not at you, not above you, to you. And somehow that was enough. Fred Rogers wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't chasing ratings or recognition. What he wanted was something far more rare. He wanted to understand children. Not just entertain them, but truly see them. He believed something radical for his time, that children's feelings mattered just as much as adults, that fear, sadness, confusion, and even anger weren't things to ignore, but things to explore. And so, week after week, episode after episode, he created something extraordinary. Not just a television show, but an emotional sanctuary. While other programs focused on teaching letters and numbers, Fred focused on something deeper, helping children understand what was happening inside their hearts. He spoke about divorce, about loneliness, about death, topics many adults struggled to explain. But he did it gently, carefully, honestly, and children listened. Because they felt it. They knew he meant every word. Over more than 3 decades, the show grew into something timeless. Nearly 900 episodes aired, each one built on the same simple idea that kindness, patience, and understanding could change lives. And it did. For countless viewers, those quiet moments in front of the television became the safest part of their day. But to truly understand the man behind that legacy, you have to look beyond the screen. You have to meet the person who stood beside him through it all. Before she was known to the world, Joan Rogers was building a life of her own. She wasn't living in anyone's shadow. She wasn't waiting to be discovered through someone else's story. She had her own passions, her own voice, and her own path. Born in 1928, she grew up in a home that valued curiosity, conversation, and creativity. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was a language she spoke fluently from an early age. By the time she reached college, it was clear she had something special. She didn't just play the piano, she connected through it. Her performances weren't about perfection. They were about feeling, expression, presence. And when she arrived at Rollins College, she wasn't looking for love. But that's where she met him. Fred Rogers. At first glance, there was nothing flashy about him. He wasn't the loudest in the room. He didn't try to impress. He didn't demand attention. But there was something about him. Something quiet but powerful. He listened. Not the kind of listening people pretend to do while waiting for their turn to speak. Real listening. The kind that makes you feel like your thoughts actually matter. That's what caught Joanne's attention. And slowly, something began to grow between them. Not a dramatic whirlwind romance. Not grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Something steadier. Something deeper. They bonded over music. Over conversations that stretched late into the evening. Over a shared understanding of what it meant to care deeply about people. Their connection wasn't built on excitement. It was built on trust. And when life pulled them in different directions, him to New York, her staying behind, they didn't let distance break it. They wrote letters. Long, thoughtful letters filled with honesty, longing, and quiet affection. And one day, among those letters, came a question that would change everything. A proposal. Joanne didn't hesitate. She said yes. Their marriage would last more than 50 years. But it wasn't a perfect story. It was a real one. They built a life together filled with music, laughter, routine, and responsibility. They raised 2 sons. They navigated careers, expectations, and the pressures that come with living a life partially in the public eye. And through it all, Joanne saw something the rest of the world didn't. She saw the full version of Fred, not just the gentle neighbor, but the man behind him. Because as much as people believed Fred Rogers was exactly who he appeared to be, the truth is more complicated. Yes, he was kind. Yes, he was patient. Yes, he believed in everything he taught. But it didn't come effortlessly. It was a choice. Every single day. To the outside world, Fred seemed almost impossibly calm. A man untouched by frustration. Someone who never raised his voice, never lost his composure. But Joanne knew better. She knew he wasn't perfect. She knew he struggled. He carried the emotional weight of millions of children who looked up to him. He felt responsible for the messages he shared, for the comfort he provided, for the trust people placed in him. That kind of responsibility doesn't come without pressure. And sometimes it showed, not in dramatic outbursts, not in ways that would shatter his image, but in quiet moments. Moments of exhaustion, doubt, reflection. He held himself to an incredibly high standard. He wanted to be worthy of the role he played in people's lives. And that meant working constantly, not just on his show, but on himself. Even his routines reflected that discipline. He swam every morning. He maintained his weight with precision. He paid attention to details others might ignore. And there was meaning behind it all. The number 143 became a quiet symbol in his life. 1 letter for I, for love, 3 for you. A simple message. But for Fred, simplicity carried power. Still, behind that structure, that intention, that outward calm, was a human being navigating the same challenges as anyone else. And that's what makes his story so much more powerful. Because kindness wasn't something that came easily to him. It was something he practiced, and then came the chapter no one wanted to face. The part of the story that Joanne would later describe with honesty and quiet strength. What some might call the awful truth. But not in the way people expect. There is no scandal, no hidden wrongdoing, no shocking secret waiting to be exposed. Instead, there was something far more real. Fred Rogers became ill. At first, it seemed small. Discomfort, indigestion, the kind of thing you brush off and promise to deal with later. But it didn't go away. And when they finally sought answers, the reality was difficult to accept. Stomach cancer. It had already progressed. The man who had spent his life comforting others was now facing something he couldn't simply talk through. And for the first time, the world he had carefully built, one of calm, reassurance, and emotional clarity, was met with uncertainty. Joanne saw it all. The strength, the fear, the moments of silence where words weren't enough. Fred faced his illness with courage, but that didn't mean he wasn't affected by it. There were days when the weight of it all became heavy. Days when even he, the man who helped others navigate their feelings, had to sit with his own. And yet, he kept going. He showed up when he could. He stayed connected to the people and work he loved. He held onto the values that defined him, even as his body began to weaken. There was something deeply human in that. Not perfection, but persistence. In his final days, life slowed down. The routines changed. The energy faded. The reality of what was coming became impossible to ignore. But even then, there were moments of peace. Music still brought comfort. Presence still mattered. Love still filled the space around him. He passed away at home, surrounded by family. Quietly, the same way he had lived so much of his life. For a long time, Joanne didn't share these details publicly, not because she wanted to hide the truth, but because she wanted to protect it. Some stories feel too personal, too sacred to be turned into headlines or sound bites. But as the years passed, she began to see something clearly. People didn't need a perfect version of Fred Rogers. They needed the real one. Because the real story wasn't about a flawless man who never struggled. It was about someone who felt deeply, faced challenges, and still chose kindness anyway. That was the truth. And that truth didn't take away from his legacy. It strengthened it. After his passing, many expected Joanne to step away, quietly. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward. She became a voice for his message, carrying it into a new generation. She spoke about his work, his values, and the lessons he left behind, not as distant memories, but as living ideas that still mattered. She reminded people that kindness isn't outdated, that empathy isn't weakness, that taking the time to truly see someone can change everything. Through interviews, appearances, and her continued involvement in his work, she made sure his message didn't fade. It evolved. And in doing so, she showed the world something else. That love doesn't end when someone is gone. It continues in the way we speak, act, and care for others. Years later, even as the world changed, the impact of Fred Rogers remained. New generations discovered his work. His voice, his presence, his message, it all found new life in a faster, louder, more chaotic world. And somehow it still worked, because what he offered was timeless. Not entertainment, but understanding. So, what was the awful truth that Joanne revealed? Not a scandal, not a secret designed to shock, but something much more meaningful. That Fred Rogers was human, that he struggled, that he felt pressure, that he faced illness, fear, and uncertainty, and that despite all of it, he chose kindness, again and again, every single day. And maybe that changes everything. Because it means the person so many looked up to wasn't perfect. He was real, and if someone like him had to work at being kind, then maybe kindness isn't something you're born with. Maybe it's something you choose, something you practice, something you become. So now, when you think of that gentle man in a cardigan, speaking softly, looking directly into the camera, you might see something different. Not just a symbol of comfort, but a person. A person who carried weight, who faced struggles, who didn't always have the answers, but who still showed up with patience, with care, with love. And maybe that's what makes his story unforgettable. Not that he was perfect, but that he never stopped trying to be good. What do you think? Does knowing the truth change how you see him, or does it make his legacy even stronger? Let your thoughts be heard.